The contents of the USB drive that spilled from Queen Camilla's briefcase would prove to contain the most devastating political intelligence gathered in British history. As forensic analysts at Scotland Yard worked through the night to decode the encrypted files, the scope of corruption they revealed shocked even the most cynical investigators. The drive contained over 10,000 documents spanning 15 years of covert financial arrangements between the royal family and foreign powers. Detective Inspector Hayes found himself at the center of a crisis that extended far beyond his jurisdiction or experience. The evidence suggested that members of the royal family had been selling state secrets along with crown jewels, using their access to classified information as leverage in negotiations with international buyers. The financial desperation that had driven them to theft had apparently led them into outright treason. King Charles spent the 3 days following Camilla's arrest in complete isolation within Buckingham Palace, refusing to see anyone except his most trusted advisors. The weight of the revelations had broken something fundamental within him, and those who observed him during this period reported a man aged decades in mere hours. The reality of what his authorization of the jewelry sales had unleashed was destroying him psychologically. The international investigation that followed Camilla's arrest revealed a network of corruption spanning multiple continents. Royal families across Europe had been secretly coordinating their activities, sharing information about which historical artifacts could be sold without immediate detection. The British monarchy had apparently been the most aggressive participants, but they were far from alone in their desperate financial maneuvers. Prime Minister Ashworth faced the most serious constitutional crisis in British history. The evidence emerging from the USB drive suggested that several members of his own cabinet had received payments from foreign governments channeled through royal accounts. The line between the monarchy and the government had been so thoroughly compromised that it was unclear which institution, if any, retained legitimacy. Sarah Mitchell's investigation had evolved from a simple story about missing jewelry into an expose that would win her every major journalism award. Her sources were providing information faster than she could process it, as insiders throughout the establishment rushed to distance themselves from the expanding scandal. The monarchy's traditional wall of secrecy had crumbled completely. The most shocking revelation came when analysts discovered that the USB drive contained detailed intelligence reports that should never have left government security facilities. Someone within the royal household had been systematically copying classified documents and using them as bargaining chips with foreign powers. The crown jewels thefts were revealed to be merely the visible tip of an espionage operation that had been running for over a decade. Klaus Weber's testimony before an international tribunal revealed the true scale of the royal assets that had been liquidated. Beyond the British crown jewels, pieces from the Danish, Norwegian, and Spanish royal collections had been offered for sale through the same networks. The total value of stolen or illegally sold items exceeded £500 million, representing one of the largest art thefts in human history. Queen Camilla's interrogation sessions, conducted under conditions of strict secrecy to prevent further damage to national security, revealed a woman who had been driven to desperate measures by financial pressures that the public never knew existed. The monarchy's expenses had grown exponentially while their income sources remained static, creating an impossible situation that traditional constitutional arrangements could not address. The bankruptcy that the royal family had been desperately trying to avoid became inevitable once the scope of their debts was revealed. Court documents showed that maintaining the current level of royal activities would require an annual budget increase of over 300%, something that no government could justify to taxpayers already struggling with economic difficulties. Detective Inspector Hayes's investigation uncovered evidence that the financial crisis had been deliberately concealed from Parliament and the Prime Minister for over 2 years. Royal advisors had been using increasingly creative accounting methods to hide the severity of the situation, while secretly negotiating with foreign buyers to liquidate assets that legally belonged to the British people. The international buyers of the stolen jewelry found themselves caught in a legal nightmare as governments worldwide moved to freeze assets and recover stolen items. Several major auction houses faced criminal charges for failing to verify the provenance of obviously questionable pieces, while private collectors discovered that their expensive purchases would have to be surrendered without compensation. The revelation that sent the final shockwave through the British establishment came when investigators discovered that the royal family had been blackmailing government officials using information gathered through their privileged access to state functions. The monarchy had been systematically documenting the private conversations and activities of politicians, judges, and business leaders, creating a web of leverage that explained their ability to operate without oversight for so long. King Charles's abdication announcement came on a gray Thursday morning exactly 1 week after Camilla's arrest. His televised address to the nation was brief and devastating in its honesty about the failures that had led to the crisis. For the first time in British history, a monarch was stepping down not due to personal scandal but because the institution itself had been revealed to be fundamentally corrupt. The USB drive's contents ultimately filled over 50,000 pages of evidence that would take years to fully investigate. The files revealed payments to terrorist organizations, arms deals facilitated through royal connections, and money laundering operations that had processed billions of pounds through accounts nominally controlled by the monarchy. The crown jewels theft was merely the mistake that had exposed a vast criminal enterprise. Prince William's emergency coronation took place under conditions of unprecedented security and public skepticism. The new king's first act was to voluntarily surrender all royal privileges that had allowed the monarchy to operate without meaningful oversight. His speech announcing the complete restructuring of the royal household was watched by over 2 billion people worldwide, as nations grappled with the implications of the revelations for their own governmental systems. The trials that followed would reshape international law regarding sovereign immunity and diplomatic privilege. Camilla's conviction on charges of theft, money laundering, espionage, and treason resulted in a sentence that would keep her in prison for the rest of her life. Her cooperation with investigators, however, prevented even more severe damage to British national security by helping authorities understand exactly which secrets had been compromised. The recovered crown jewels were placed on permanent public display for the first time in British history, as the new monarchy sought to demonstrate transparency and public accountability. The emerald necklace that had started the investigation became a symbol of the hidden corruption that had infected the highest levels of government, displayed alongside documentation of its illegal sale and recovery. The financial restructuring of the monarchy that followed the scandal reduced the royal household budget by over 60%, with remaining activities funded through direct parliamentary appropriation rather than traditional revenue sources. The new arrangement made the monarchy accountable to elected officials in ways that would have been unthinkable before the crisis. Detective Inspector Hayes received recognition for his role in exposing the scandal, but the personal cost of the investigation had been enormous. The constitutional issues raised by his arrest of a sitting queen would be debated by legal scholars for decades, while the security implications of the royal espionage would require years of damage assessment and relationship repair with allied governments. The international ramifications of the scandal continued to unfold months after the initial arrests. Several European governments fell as the investigation revealed the extent of royal involvement in their domestic politics, while intelligence agencies worldwide reassessed their relationships with traditional allies whose royal families had been compromised by financial desperation. The item that Camilla had been reaching for in that final moment before arrest ultimately contained evidence that would result in over 200 arrests across 12 countries. The USB drive had documented not just the monarchy's crimes, but the entire network of enablers, conspirators, and beneficiaries who had helped sustain the corruption for so many years. Sarah Mitchell's final article in the series that would define her career focused on the human cost of the scandal. Thousands of palace employees lost their jobs as the royal household was restructured, while the British people grappled with the revelation that an institution they had trusted and supported had betrayed that trust so completely. The monarchy survived, but in a form so changed that it bore little resemblance to its former self. The USB drive's ultimate revelation was perhaps the most disturbing. The corruption had been so systematic and extensive that similar scandals might be waiting to explode in royal houses around the world. The British monarchy's downfall had revealed vulnerabilities in the entire concept of hereditary privilege that democratic societies could no longer ignore. The crown jewels scandal that began with missing brooches and tiaras had evolved into a complete reimagining of the relationship between monarchy and democracy in the modern world. The item Camilla reached for in her final moment of freedom had contained enough evidence to ensure that such betrayals of public trust could never again be hidden behind the veil of royal privilege and constitutional tradition. The shock waves from the scandal continued to reshape British society years after the initial revelations. The monarchy that emerged from the crisis was smaller, more accountable, and more transparent than anything in its thousand-year history. The crown jewels themselves, now permanently displayed for public viewing, served as a reminder of how close the nation had come to losing not just its treasures, but its democratic foundations themselves. The alarm bells at Scotland Yard headquarters began ringing at precisely 6:15 a.m., jolting Detective Inspector Hayes from his restless sleep at his desk. The overnight surveillance team had intercepted communications indicating that Queen Camilla was preparing for an unscheduled departure from Britain within hours. Her private jet had been fueled, and flight plans filed for Monaco, with departure scheduled for 10:30 a.m. Hayes rushed through the empty London streets as dawn broke over the city, his mind racing through the legal complexities of what he was about to attempt. Arresting a sitting queen, even one caught in apparent criminal activity, required coordination with the highest levels of government. Prime Minister Ashworth had been awakened and was already en route to an emergency meeting at Downing Street. At Clarence House, Queen Camilla stood before her bedroom mirror, carefully applying makeup to hide the stress lines that had deepened over recent weeks. Her reflection showed a woman under enormous pressure, but her hands remained steady as she prepared for what she believed would be her escape from an increasingly impossible situation. The mysterious leather briefcase sat open on her bed, revealing its contents for the first time to her lady-in-waiting, Lady Thornbury, who had arrived early to assist with packing. Inside were documents that would have sent shockwaves through the establishment: bank account numbers, jewelry appraisal certificates, and, most damning of all, a detailed inventory of crown jewels with notations indicating which pieces had already been sold and which were targeted for future transactions. Lady Thornbury's loyalty to the crown warred with her growing horror at what she was witnessing. The documents clearly showed that the jewelry theft was not an isolated incident, but part of a systematic plan to liquidate royal assets. The emerald necklace alone had been valued at £12 million, with buyers already lined up in Dubai and Hong Kong. Meanwhile, at Buckingham Palace, King Charles was meeting with Sir Edmund Hartwell, his private secretary, and Lord Chancellor Margaret Stevens in the most secure room of the palace. The conversation was being conducted in whispers, despite electronic sweeps confirming the room was free of surveillance devices. The king's haggard appearance suggested he had not slept in days. The revelation that would soon shock the world was slowly emerging from their hushed conversation. Charles had not only known about Camilla's activities, but had initially sanctioned them as a desperate measure to address a financial crisis that threatened the monarchy's very survival. The royal family's investments had suffered catastrophic losses in recent market downturns, and traditional sources of funding were no longer sufficient to maintain their obligations. Sir Edmund produced a thick folder containing financial projections that painted a devastating picture. Without immediate infusion of liquid capital, the royal household would be unable to meet its commitments within 6 months. The maintenance costs for royal properties, security expenses, and staff salaries had grown beyond the monarchy's ability to sustain them through conventional means. The plan to sell selected crown jewels had seemed like the only solution that would avoid public humiliation and potential dissolution of the monarchy. The pieces chosen were ones rarely displayed publicly, and their absence might go unnoticed for years. The emerald necklace was perfect because it didn't officially exist in public records, making its sale theoretically untraceable. However, what Charles had authorized as a carefully controlled emergency measure had apparently spiraled beyond his control. Camilla had begun acting independently, selling additional pieces without consultation and keeping the proceeds in accounts that Charles could not access. The king's authorization had been for 3 specific pieces. Evidence suggested that at least 7 items were now missing from the collection. Detective Inspector Hayes arrived at Heathrow Airport as Camilla's motorcade was making its way through London traffic toward the same destination. His team had established discreet surveillance positions throughout the terminal, while legal teams worked frantically to ensure that any arrests would withstand constitutional challenges that were certain to follow. The international implications of the unfolding crisis were becoming clear to government officials across Europe. If the British monarchy was revealed to be in such dire financial straits that it was selling crown jewels, it would send shockwaves through financial markets and potentially destabilize the entire European economy. Currency traders were already responding to rumors, and the pound was falling rapidly against major currencies. Sarah Mitchell had positioned herself at Heathrow's VIP terminal, having correctly anticipated that this would be where the story reached its climax. Her sources had provided her with enough information to piece together the basic outline of the scandal, and she was preparing to break the story that would define her career and potentially bring down a monarchy. Queen Camilla's limousine pulled through the security gates at exactly 9:45 a.m., giving her what she believed was sufficient time to board her flight and leave British jurisdiction before any authorities could act. Her confidence was bolstered by her belief that royal privilege would protect her even if her activities were discovered. She had no idea that constitutional lawyers had been working through the night to strip away those protections. As Camilla stepped from her vehicle, the leather briefcase clutched tightly in her left hand, Detective Inspector Hayes received the final authorization he needed from the Home Secretary. The arrest warrant had been signed, and teams were in position. The next few minutes would determine whether the British monarchy could survive the scandal that was about to explode into public view. The first sign that something was wrong came when Camilla noticed additional security personnel around the terminal building. These were not her usual protection officers, and their positioning suggested they were there to contain rather than protect. Her personal bodyguard, sensing the change in atmosphere, quietly alerted her to the unusual presence. Inside the briefcase, beyond the documents Lady Thornberry had seen, were items that would prove even more damaging to the royal family's reputation. Photographs showed Camilla meeting with known international arms dealers and representatives of questionable governments. The jewelry sales were apparently part of a much larger scheme involving the monarchy in activities that went far beyond simple financial desperation. The most shocking revelation was yet to come. Among the documents was correspondence indicating that several European royal families had been involved in similar activities, creating an international network of nobility secretly liquidating their historical assets to maintain their lifestyles. The British monarchy was not alone in facing financial ruin, but they were apparently the most aggressive in their response to the crisis. Klaus Weber, the German gemologist whose conscience had triggered the investigation, was at that moment providing testimony to investigators in Berlin. His evidence included not just the British crown jewels, but pieces from the Swedish, Dutch, and Belgian royal collections. The scope of the scandal was expanding beyond anything the authorities had initially imagined. As Camilla approached the private jet that was to carry her to safety, she made a crucial mistake that would seal her fate. Believing herself to be moments away from escape, she opened the briefcase one final time to verify that her most important documents were secure. This action was captured by long-range surveillance cameras operated by Hayes' team, providing clear evidence of her possession of the incriminating materials. The moment of arrest came as Camilla placed her foot on the first step of the aircraft stairs. Detective Inspector Hayes stepped forward with his warrant, supported by armed officers whose presence made any resistance futile. The words he spoke would echo through history. "Your Majesty, I am placing you under arrest on suspicion of theft, money laundering, and conspiracy to defraud the crown." The briefcase fell from Camilla's shocked grasp, its contents spilling across the tarmac in full view of Sarah Mitchell's cameras. The photographs that would appear on newspaper front pages within hours showed official royal correspondence, bank statements from Swiss accounts, and, most damaging of all, detailed plans for the sale of additional crown jewels, including the imperial state crown itself. Back at Buckingham Palace, King Charles received word of his wife's arrest with a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that the conspiracy was finally exposed and could no longer spiral further out of control, terror at what the public revelation would mean for his reign and the future of the monarchy. His first call was to Prime Minister Ashworth. His second was to the Archbishop of Canterbury. The legal proceedings that followed Camilla's arrest revealed the true scope of the financial crisis facing the monarchy. Court documents filed under emergency provisions showed debts exceeding £200 million, with assets that could not be liquidated without parliamentary approval. The traditional sources of royal income had proven inadequate to maintain the extensive infrastructure of the modern monarchy. Queen Camilla's first statement to investigators, made after she waived her right to diplomatic immunity in a desperate attempt to minimize the scandal's impact on Charles and the institution of monarchy, provided details that would reshape public understanding of royal finances. The crown jewel sales were revealed to be just one element of a comprehensive plan to address insolvency that threatened to force the monarchy into bankruptcy. The international buyers who had purchased the stolen jewelry found themselves in possession of items that would now be impossible to sell or display. Governments across the globe began coordination efforts to recover the pieces and return them to Britain, while investigating whether their own royal families had engaged in similar activities. The most dramatic revelation came when Camilla finally revealed what she had been reaching for in that final moment before her arrest. Hidden in a secret compartment of the briefcase was a USB drive containing financial records that implicated members of Parliament, senior government officials, and international business leaders in a web of corruption that extended far beyond the royal family. The drive contained evidence of bribes paid to officials who had helped facilitate the jewelry sales, kickbacks to politicians who had blocked investigations into royal finances, and, most explosively, records of payments made to foreign governments in exchange for providing safe havens for stolen royal assets. The scandal was no longer just about the monarchy. It threatened to bring down the entire British government. As news of the arrests spread across Britain and around the world, crowds began gathering outside royal residences with a mixture of curiosity, anger, and shock. The revelation that their beloved crown jewels had been sold to finance royal extravagance struck many citizens as the ultimate betrayal of public trust. Calls for the abolition of the monarchy began spreading across social media platforms. The item Camilla had been reaching for in that final moment would prove to contain enough information to fill thousands of pages of investigation reports and potentially send dozens of powerful figures to prison. Her desperate attempt to protect those secrets would ultimately ensure their exposure, transforming a royal financial scandal into a constitutional crisis that would reshape British democracy itself. The morning mist hung heavy over Windsor Castle as Queen Camilla Parker Bowles stood at her bedroom window, watching the groundskeepers tend to the royal gardens below. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped her morning tea, the delicate china cup rattling against its saucer. Today would change everything. Though the millions of people across Britain had no idea what storm was about to break over the monarchy. Inside the private vault beneath Buckingham Palace, Master jeweler Harrison Wright made his routine monthly inspection of the crown jewels. What he discovered would send shockwaves through the royal establishment and beyond. 3 pieces were missing from their designated positions: the Cullinan III and, for brooch, the Delhi Durbar tiara, and, most shocking of all, a previously unknown emerald necklace that had never been catalogued in any official royal inventory. Wright's practiced, I immediately noticed the subtle differences in the display cases. The velvet cushions bore impressions where the missing pieces should have rested, and the security sensors showed no signs of tampering. This meant only one thing. Someone with the highest level of access had removed these items without following proper protocols. Meanwhile, at Clarence House, Camilla's personal secretary Margaret Hartwell was frantically searching through filing cabinets in the Queen's private office. Phone calls had been coming in all morning from various auction houses across Europe, all asking about the authenticity of certain pieces being offered for private sale. The descriptions matched items from the royal collection perfectly. The first public hint that something was amiss came during the weekly meeting between King Charles III and Prime Minister Robert Ashworth. Charles appeared unusually distracted, constantly checking his phone and excusing himself to take urgent calls. Palace staff noticed increased security presence around all royal residences, though no official explanation was given. Sarah Mitchell, a sharp-eyed reporter for the London Herald, had been tracking unusual activity in the high-end jewelry market for weeks. Her sources in Geneva had mentioned several extraordinary pieces appearing for private sale, items that seemed to have royal provenance, but lacked proper documentation. When she began connecting the dots, a disturbing pattern emerged. The emerald necklace that Wright had discovered missing was particularly troubling because it had never appeared in any official royal inventory. This suggested either a massive oversight in palace record-keeping or something more sinister. The necklace contained 37 perfectly matched Colombian emeralds, each the size of a thumbnail, set in platinum with diamonds from the former British colonies. Detective Inspector Jonathan Hayes of Scotland Yard's Special Protection Command received an urgent call at 11:47 a.m. The voice on the other end was tense and spoke in coded language that immediately told Hayes this involved the royal family. Within 30 minutes, he was racing through London traffic toward Buckingham Palace, his mind spinning with possibilities. Queen Camilla's behavior had been increasingly erratic over the past month, according to close palace sources who spoke on condition of anonymity. She had been taking frequent trips abroad, often with minimal security detail, and sometimes without informing the king of her exact whereabouts. Staff members reported finding her in restricted areas of the palace at odd hours, areas she normally would never visit. The jewelry auction houses in question were all located in countries without extradition treaties with Britain, Monaco, Dubai, and Switzerland. Each had received contact from a woman with a refined British accent, offering extremely valuable pieces for immediate sale. The woman insisted on cash transactions and refused to provide standard documentation of ownership. Thomas Pemberton, the elderly keeper of the privy purse, had been growing increasingly concerned about discrepancies in the royal household's financial records. Certain accounts showed unexplained withdrawals, and there were charges for services that didn't match any authorized royal activities. When he finally brought his concerns to the king's attention, Charles's reaction was not what Pemberton had expected. Instead of demanding immediate investigation, the king had asked Pemberton to handle the matter with absolute discretion and to avoid creating any written records of their conversation. This response troubled Pemberton deeply, as it suggested the king already knew more about the situation than he was willing to admit. The Cullinan III and for brooch had particular sentimental value beyond its monetary worth. It had been a favorite piece of Queen Elizabeth II, who often wore it during state functions. The brooch contained 2 diamonds cut from the legendary Cullinan diamond, the largest gem-quality rough diamond ever found. Its disappearance was not just a theft, it was an attack on royal heritage itself. Camilla's lady-in-waiting, Lady Victoria Thornberry, noticed her employer's increasingly paranoid behavior. The Queen had begun insisting that certain conversations take place outdoors, away from any possible recording devices. She had also started carrying a small leather briefcase with her at all times, never allowing it out of her sight. The Delhi Durbar tiara represented another piece of the puzzle. This magnificent piece had been created for Queen Mary to wear at the 1911 Delhi Durbar, where King George V was proclaimed Emperor of India. Its 11 emerald drops and multiple diamond settings made it one of the most recognizable pieces in the royal collection. Its absence would be noticed quickly by anyone familiar with royal regalia. Security footage from various London locations began to paint a troubling picture when Detective Inspector Hayes started his investigation. Camilla had been captured on CCTV at several high-end financial institutions, always accompanied by the same mysterious briefcase. Bank records, when finally obtained through court orders, showed large cash withdrawals from accounts connected to royal household expenses. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source, a German gemologist named Klaus Weber, who had been contacted about authenticating several pieces for a private collector. Weber's expertise was so renowned that his authentication was sought after by auction houses worldwide. When he examined digital photographs of the pieces in question, he immediately recognized them as belonging to the British crown jewels. Weber's conscience finally compelled him to contact British authorities when he realized the magnitude of what he was being asked to authenticate. His detailed report to Scotland Yard included photographs, measurements, and historical documentation that proved beyond doubt that the missing royal pieces were being prepared for sale on the international market. Queen Camilla's public appearances during this period became increasingly strained. Royal photographers noted that she seemed constantly on edge, frequently glancing at her security detail and checking her phone. Her usual warmth during public engagements was replaced by mechanical smiles and abbreviated conversations with well-wishers. The breaking point came when Harrison Wright made a second, even more shocking discovery during his investigation of the vault. Hidden behind false backing in one of the display cases, he found a handwritten note that would change everything. The note was brief but devastating. The Crown cannot afford another scandal. These pieces were never here. HW, destroy this note after reading. The handwriting was unmistakably royal, flowing script that matched samples from official correspondence. But the signature was even more troubling. It appeared to be King Charles's own hand. This suggested that the missing jewelry was not stolen in any conventional sense, but had been deliberately removed with the knowledge, if not the direct involvement, of the king himself. Meanwhile, Sarah Mitchell's investigation had led her to a private banking facility in Geneva, where sources confirmed that a British woman matching Camilla's description had visited 3 times in the past month. Each visit had involved accessing a private safety deposit box, and each time she had left carrying a small package. The international implications of the scandal were beginning to emerge. If members of the royal family were secretly selling crown jewels, it could indicate financial difficulties far more severe than anyone had imagined. The British pound had already been under pressure due to economic uncertainties, and news of royal financial instability could trigger a currency crisis. Detective Inspector Hayes found himself in an impossible position. The evidence clearly pointed to criminal activity involving the highest levels of the monarchy, but investigating the royal family required navigating centuries of legal precedent and constitutional law. He needed irrefutable proof before taking any action that could destabilize the government itself. The palace's official position remained that all crown jewels were secure and accounted for, but behind closed doors, panic was setting in. Secret meetings were being held between senior palace staff, government officials, and representatives from the Bank of England. The stability of the monarchy itself was at stake. Queen Camilla's travel preparations became increasingly frantic as the net began to close around her. Staff reported seeing her burning documents in her private fireplace, despite the warm spring weather making such fires unnecessary. Her personal security team noticed her asking detailed questions about flight schedules to non-extradition countries. The emerald necklace remained the most mysterious element of the entire scandal. Historical research revealed that it had been given to the royal family by a wealthy Indian Maharaja in 1923, but it had been deliberately kept secret due to political sensitivities surrounding British colonial rule. Its existence had been known only to a few senior royals and the most trusted palace staff. As evening approached on what would later be known as Black Tuesday in royal circles, Camilla made her final preparations for what she believed would be a routine departure from Britain. She had no idea that Detective Inspector Hayes had spent the afternoon obtaining emergency court orders that would freeze her assets and place her under surveillance the moment she attempted to leave the country. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose secrets the monarchy had hoped to keep buried forever. The missing jewelry was only the beginning of a scandal that would reach into the highest levels of government and threaten to bring down the House of Windsor itself. As Camilla prepared for her journey, forces beyond her control were already moving to ensure that justice would finally be served, regardless of royal privilege or constitutional protections.